Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends from Europe and further afield, I am very pleased to be able to address you on the occasion of this international webinar organized by the JCDecaux marketing teams from the UK, Germany, Italy, Spain, and France. It is a first for us to bring you all together in this way from all these countries. It is helpful to share thoughts and new initiatives in terms of insights. It is so important at a time when we need to reboost our businesses and invent new approaches with greater agility. Despite the very severe impact of multiple lockdowns around the world and travel restrictions, there are so many reasons for optimism in the OH industry and JCDecaux in particular. During lockdown, we all felt a commitment to the out-of-home space and a love for public space. As soon as people were able to reconnect with the public space, they did it massively, sometimes too soon, sometimes too many together. Our mobility tracker set up with AdSquare assesses the level of all urban traffic movements. France, for example, is now over 90%. Belgium is up to 140% on some weeks. And even if the UK is still between 50 and 70%, depending on the indicator, we remain confident for the new coming few weeks. But during lockdown and weeks after, we have experienced and enjoyed the life of the community. It's a unique opportunity for brands to consider a move from the global village to my community. And that is a core strength of OOH. So the future of marketing is increasingly OOH, but why? At a time when many of established media channels are under enormous pressure, the OOH industry has evolved and innovated with huge investment in site infrastructure, smarter data, near real-time trading, and dynamic creative capabilities. Every day we see the acceleration of these developments and how they are aligned with wider macro marketing industry factors to spark a new paradigm in outdoor marketing. The past few years have been defined by an obsession with building the future of marketing around personal data, creating micro segments of intent delivered on a one-to-one basis in private. This age of personalization on the ad tech that fuels it sits increasingly under the microscope. The reality is that marketers still need to reach large audiences, and that's getting harder and harder. Whoever you are, it is pretty much certain that your exposure and attention to out-of-home advertising is currently increasing at exactly the same time that exposure and attention to commercial messages is decreasing in most other media. Out-of-home is the only truly universal medium that now has a unique opportunity to deploy data purposefully, to create real utility and experiences that people value at scale. In that context, we are so glad to see Justin Gibbons, author of The Brand Gap, back with his new book, The Formula for How Marketers Can Harness the Power of the Public Screen alongside the private screen to drive success throughout the brand funnel. Public-private media working in balance for long-term and short-term success. It's not brand or activation, it's both. And this book captures a moment in time for brands, not just about the impact of COVID-19, but how brands prosper and grow in our changing world. On this webinar, I'm also proud to announce the launch of our new barometer, Pulse 2020, a sentiment tracker designed with the support of our partner Kantar to explore the nature of changing behaviors and media consumptions in the post-COVID world. This will provide strategic guidance on how brands can capitalize on the public media, and OOH in particular. OOH is a big media reimagined to inspire creatives and planners whilst delivering increased efficiency and effectiveness, better and more accurate measurement, and most importantly, continued brand visibility and safety. I wish you a fruitful webinar. Enjoy.
Thank you, Jean-Charles Decaux. Co-Chief Executive of JCDecaux around the world. A fantastic introduction to this international webinar. If you don't know who I am, I'm David McAvoy. I'm the Marketing Director for JCDecaux in the UK, and we are the publisher of this new book on media planning post-COVID. You might wonder why JCDecaux is writing a book about planning post-COVID that doesn't mention out of home or digital out of home. In this world, cross-media planning has become more important for brand success. How brands work together, how channels work together has become more and more important. And therefore this book has captured the imagination of how brands can use different media channels to work together. It's obviously captured the imagination around the world because we have over 20 countries on this call today. So it's a bonjour from France, hello, hey, howdy, hi. Welcome to the international media community. I've known Justin for many years now. I've admired his great insight. I've admired the way that he makes difficult concepts really easy to understand. And we've got a wonderful concept for you here today. It's called P²+C = 5. And it's a formula or even an equation for brand success. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Justin, who's going to give you a preview today of how the book came about, what's the P's, what's the C, and how does he get it to equal 5? So without more ado, I'd like to hand over to the author. He's a media researcher. He's a behavioural economist. He's also a cool hunter of trends. And this is a trend he wants to talk to you about today. Justin, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. I have to begin by letting you in on a secret, which is that this book did not begin life with the title P²+C = 5. It actually started with some research I was doing over the past 3 years around something that I called the brand gap. And I was doing research amongst clients and agencies and talking to them about why there seemed to be a gap between what on the one hand they knew was best practice and the optimum way to invest in terms of brand and response, and then what happened in reality, because what we were seeing in all of the media data that I was looking at was more and more money going into primarily digital response channels and less money going into brand. And this was despite lots of good work and lots of empirical evidence that said this balance needs to be very different. So I began life looking at this this gap, and really that research was triggered in part by seeing the Kantar data, their brand Z data, which looks at the value of brands, and it looks at the actual financial contribution that the brand makes to a company's bottom line. And for the first time in the UK, we saw the value of the top 75 brands come down, and this was a trend that was predicted to then spread into other countries as well. But you know, for the first time, we were seeing not only were brands being under invested in, but also their value to the business was starting to go down. Surely this was a big trend. So originally I thought, well, this will be a very interesting time to write a book about the state of brands, why there is a brand gap, and why we should all be thinking about this. But two things happened that made me think, well, maybe I should think about this book a little bit differently. The first, of course, was the COVID crisis and the various lockdowns that we've all been through. And for me, when I looked at the consumer data and some of the consumer research that was coming out of people's response to the COVID crisis, I saw people asking lots of questions about lots of different aspects of their lives. They were really being asked to reevaluate and reimagine almost every aspect of their life, from the local things like community, neighborhood, the street I live on, the shops I visit, through to some of the bigger stuff like work, leisure time, holidays, government and society. People really did start to ask much bigger questions and often come up with new ideas. And this made me think that the book shouldn't just be about the challenges or the problem of the brand gap, but maybe I could write a book about some of the new solutions. Maybe this book was a chance to provide a new solution to the problem rather than just write a book about the problem. So that's where the idea came from, and why I landed on this idea of a slightly strange piece of algebra, which is P²+C = 5. And for the webinar today, I'd like to just talk a little bit about some of the ideas behind the P and the C and the 5, to give you a flavour of what's in the book. And it really starts with this idea of P². And one of the big impacts that we saw when we looked at consumer research about the COVID crisis was the importance and the growing importance of one factor, and that was trust. In consumers' eyes, trust became the most important factor in their brand choice and indeed in their media choice. People wanted brands they could trust, that they could rely on, that they were confident in, that they could believe in. And in their media choices, it was much the same. People were more questioning of some of the media, some of the fake news and some of the stories they were getting in unregulated channels. And certainly in the UK, we saw people move towards channels that were much more trusted and with stronger reputations. And this was a trend that I then saw spread around the world. So both in brands and media choices, trust became something that was very, very important. And when I think about trust in a media sense, there's a great line, which is, you can't tell lies in public. And the really trusted media channels are the ones that have status, have stature, are regulated. And broadcast channels like television, out of home, are channels that give a halo of trust to the brands that use them. So if trust is important to consumers, a great way of building trust is to use what I've called in the book, the first P is public media, public channels. Channels that put your brand into the public sphere and give you a halo of trust with that. So the first part of P is public marketing. But what's interesting, I think, as I was looking at the evidence around public marketing, was the effect public marketing has on private marketing, and those two ideas of how we best use public and private channels, public and private screens, the public channels that we see out there and the private screens that we carry around with us all the time. How those two work together it was coming through in some of the evidence we were seeing. So I remember when I started my career in media planning, the idea of priming was a very important one. In other words, what I paid attention to and what I saw in big broadcast channels was the stuff I was much more likely to see in some of the smaller, lower attention channels. And that's completely as true today as it was then. We look at the latest research, and research from Facebook actually, that says when an advertisement has been seen in out of home, it is much more likely to then be seen on mobile and in your social feed. So we're seeing this effect of priming, and this really made me think that public and private working together was at the heart of this new formula for how we make media investment work harder, by using this idea of priming and by building some trust around the brands and the messages that are seen in those public media. It makes all of the private channels work much harder. So at the start of the thinking, the first big idea in the book is P², how we make public and private work together. Which then brings us on to the C, and the C word in this instance is not COVID, you'll be pleased to hear, but is in fact creativity. Because when I speak to clients about the creative challenges of modern marketing, they will often talk to me about the increase in number of channels can also mean the increase in the production budget. So having to reproduce ads in endless formats to meet the requirements of the media plan. But of course, now is a time when it's never been as easy to move creative assets around from one format to another. I was influenced in my thinking around this topic by Jenny Romaniuk and Byron Sharp and their work on distinctive assets. And they should build the case that the most powerful way of building strong brands is by the reinforcement of distinctive assets. So a brand's color, logo, its strap line, its logo. And those distinctive assets have never been as easy to move around between mobile, between digital out of home, between online video. And it really is something which has become much easier and much cheaper and more cost efficient now to do. So creativity has been liberated, and with any liberation of creativity, we are allowed then to explore lots of new and make use of context in the way that we do our media planning. And again, I go back to my early years as a media planner, when context was something that we were trained in as an idea, which is that messaging works much harder when it is seen in context. I remember speaking at a conference when a very famous art director from an ad agency pulled up this image you can probably see of the Sistine Chapel. And of course, it's an image that we tend to see in a book or on a screen. But of course, Michelangelo put it on the ceiling, his idea being that if you wanted to look at God, you should be looking up. And this, of course, is a great example of context being at the heart of media planning and context making a message work so much harder. So the C word in the book is about not only creativity being more portable and being easier than ever to move around between formats, but also the effect, the positive effect that we can have of using context. And all the evidence, and there's lots of it in the book, says that putting an advertising message in the correct context, in an appropriate context, makes it work harder. It makes all of the effect of it amplify. So if the P² is about public and private working together, the C is about how we think much more creatively about our media planning. And why does it all equal 5? Well, the idea of equaling 5 was that there is a prize on offer. And there are 5 prizes on offer for getting this right. And these are 5 outcomes that we should be planning our media around. I've always thought that planning in an outcome-based way is the key to good planning. And I think often planning which is done without outcomes in mind is the weakest. So really planning with 5 outcomes in mind is a way of realizing these 5 prizes. The first outcome to think about is trust, and we've talked a little bit about that in terms of using public channels to really build trust and surround brands with this halo of trust, which is so important for consumers at the moment as they ask really fundamental questions about the brands they want to do business with. The second outcome to plan around is attention. And this came to me from a piece of research, and in fact a research program that has been put together by a company called Lumen, who say something very simple, which is that just because someone can see an advertisement doesn't mean that they will see it. And their idea is that not all media channels are created equal in terms of the attention that they get from people. And that, of course, feels true from our own experiences of media, of our own media exposure. And it leads back to this idea of priming, that by using high attention channels, we can make the lower attention channels work much harder. And indeed, the opposite is also true, that if we overinvest in low attention channels, we will get much less attention overall. So all of the latest research shows us that by using high attention channels, we can make the lower attention channels work much harder. But really planning with attention in mind stops us falling into that trap of thinking perhaps that all media impacts are created equal. In fact, they're not. They attract different amounts of attention, and we should plan with that in mind. So we should plan with an outcome of trust and an outcome of attention. And then the other three outcomes that I've talked about in the book are the three outcomes that sit at the heart of any marketeer's funnel. So awareness, consideration, and then conversion. We know, of course, that building awareness is important, and often I talk to a client about meaningful awareness, so how that awareness can have positive associations for the brand. And in the light of the work being done around how brand and response work together, it's so important at the moment that meaningful awareness is filling the funnel with as many people as possible in order for the response work to be effective. So we must plan with meaningful awareness in mind. And then I come to consideration, and I spoke with many clients and they all spoke about consideration, or the thing that sits at the middle of the funnel, as being the golden metric. This, in other words, was something that they focused on very greatly. And it was they considered it the kind of gearbox, if you like, for what linked awareness with conversion. What is the thing that unlocks all that positive sentiment that I've created in the market? And every client had a different example of their expression of consideration, because obviously consideration is different if you're selling a car than it is if you're selling a chocolate bar. But really understanding your consideration, your golden metric, and planning for it is an important outcome, which all builds to activation. And lots of money, in fact too much money, has been overinvested in pure activation work, in that kind of conversion end of the funnel. And all of the research says, and the book is full of this research, all of the research says that the conversion activity, the activation work, works much harder when awareness and consideration have been done properly. And in fact, it starts to stop working. In fact, we see the curve start to drop off and activation become less effective and less efficient when the awareness and consideration have dwindled and become less. So all of the research says that a balanced funnel, and we've seen some clients such as Adidas, we've seen clients such as EasyJet rebalance their funnel and really reap the rewards of getting that right. And of course, we've seen brands that have got that wrong as well. The final thought in the book is one that came from a phrase that was being used a lot, which was the new normal. And this was a phrase that made me very unhappy, because I had this idea that rather than a new normal, we may emerge from our COVID crisis experience with an opportunity to create a new different. I don't think we will go back to old ways of being, of old habits, of old behaviours. I think COVID crisis has been an invitation to rethink lots of aspects of our lives, and in marketing it's no different. And I think this could be a very interesting moment in time when we are invited to think differently and to create a new different in terms of the marketing we create. And that is in the book and expressed in this new formula for how we think about media planning post-COVID. So that's at the heart of the book. And I'm very pleased now to be able to introduce to you Arne Kirchum, who is the head of all things media for Unilever in Europe. And he and I have been talking about some of the ideas in the book and thinking about how it applies to a specific client and to his world over at Unilever. So Arne, if I may, I started the book with this idea of the brand gap. And I wonder if that's something that you've seen in the European markets.
Yeah, so first of all, good morning all. Good morning, Justin. Happy to be with you. And actually, this question, I think, is linked to a very old question which we are facing since decades, which is what part of the media budget should go above the line in advertising and what should finally go into promotion? I mean, I can think back to the late 80s, and since then that was a quarrel. Now, as a brand manufacturer, of course, we believe strongly in building brands as a fundamental thing for our success. But nevertheless, now with all the changes with online retailers and what we currently see, you refer to the COVID situation, is making this challenge even stronger, because we see there is so many other opportunities or possibilities to be at the lower end. Nevertheless, I think we are not in a completely different situation. We need to decide still where to put our money, and this is an ongoing discussion. I agree.
Right, thank you. In the book, I talked about public and private screens and how creative can bridge between the two. Is that something that you think about at Unilever? Yeah,
we do. Actually, we try to think from the beginning, from a holistic plan. And we try to build a creative idea in a way that it can work at all channels. It's a bit like the phrase of thinking mobile first. And these old days when we started with a TVC and then said, okay, this shall work for all the channels and we will just make a different version out of it. These are gone. We need to create to think holistic and to do our assets and create our assets in a way that they can work on all channels, as well the public ones as the private ones.
Thank you. In the book, I've talked about attention and really thinking about how different media grab attention in different ways and how we can think about attention as a planning outcome. Is attention something you're thinking about?
Yeah, we don't have exactly the same KPI as you have described in your book, but what we are used to measure the success of our media, or partly at least, is to what extent we see ad recognition and to what extent we see brand recognition. And we measure this for different creatives in the beginning, and we also measure how different media mixes can impact these scores.
Right, so it's ad recognition and brand recognition.
Yeah, which at the end is, I think, are different expressions or different KPIs, which say more or less the same thing. If we have created attention, I think then the final goal should be that the people are able to recall our ad.
Yeah, that is always a good idea. One thing I spoke to some clients about was how they were trying to find a way of testing and learning, of finding new ways of trialing changes to their marketing plan. And test and learn has always been a very digital world, a digital kind of phrase. But is test and learn something that you've been able to apply at Unilever?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have a culture of being a fact-based decision-making company, so we try to increase our knowledge about the world, and now in the digital world that's even more valid because things are changing so fast. So we do a lot of testing to understand our guidelines, but I also have to say we're an FMCG company and we are not a university. So at the end of the day, we're selling products. And we are not doing this long-term research which tells us after 3 years what we should have done differently before we failed. So that's it's a fast-moving world, and we try to get guidelines, but we understand that the time they are valid is becoming shorter and shorter.
Yeah, when I first started in advertising, somebody said to me that Unilever was called the University of Advertising. So maybe you are a university as well as a FMCG company.
Well, nice to hear this, yes.
And lastly, Arne, we were talking about some of the ideas in the book and how you see that in terms of the future of Unilever's own activity and your own media planning. Any thoughts in there that you will be able to take forward into your media planning?
Yeah, so first of all, I really was happy to see your book because first of all, it's a great confirmation of what we were thinking before. So it's good to have the scientific proof of what I'm telling my people anyway. So that's really great, and also see the understanding. But I think also looking now forward, I think the idea of combining public and private screens is a good starter for new thinking, and exactly about this idea of using the same or similar creative for public screens, for example on digital out of home, but then thinking that this could also work as a short-term video on mobile, I think is something which, and that this will increase the attention to a higher degree than what you might have planned by simply adding context and ad impressions together. This is fascinating. It's something which we have thought about in the past, but now I have a kind of scientific or research proof for it, and that is something which definitely will find a way in our thinking and our media planning.
Oh, it's great to hear. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, Arne. Lovely to talk to you on this webinar. I hope you have a great day.
Same to you. Has been a pleasure.
Okay, so Justin, the author, thank you very much. Arne, thank you very much also for your contribution from Unilever and how you believe you're already putting it into practice, and the idea of the public screen, the private screen, and the creative bridge seems to have resonated exceptionally well. Thank you, everyone on the call. We've now got the second part of our session coming up, and I'm going to hand over to Tim Green, who's Head of Insight at JCDecaux One World, to share the results of our barometer, our sentiment tracker called Pulse 22, which will give further highlights into the role of the public and the private screen. So Tim, over to you.
Thank you, David. It's with great pleasure that I can introduce to you Pulse 2020, an international mobility and sentiment tracker from JCDecaux and Kantar. This ongoing research programme is part of JCDecaux's commitment to understanding the impact of COVID-19 on the out-of-home advertising industry, the broader advertising market, and the millions of citizens that we reach through our medium every day. This will include an insight into consumers' movements, how these have changed, and their confidence levels in using different methods of transportation. We'll also delve into how behaviours have changed regarding work, socialising, and shopping. And finally, we'll take a look at the roles that advertising and brands have to play in this new world, the findings of which will be especially interesting in the light of Justin's work. How has trust in advertising been impacted by this crisis? How should brands be communicating with their consumers at this time? Ultimately, we hope this insight will help our clients to navigate this new different, not just in an efficient manner, but in an effective manner. Initially, we've run this research across the UK, French and German markets, with a nationally representative sample of 1,000 respondents in each market. Today, we'll be giving just a flavour of what's to come in the full reporting of our first wave, with a focus on the balance between the private and the public media perceptions. I'll now hand over to Beth Shears from our research partner Kantar to take you through the headlines of this first wave. Beth, over to you.
Thank you, Tim. So working with JCDecaux, we've conducted a study in France, Germany and the UK, and we're asking an online nationally representative sample of 1,000 people in each country on how the pandemic has affected them, their behaviour and the way they respond to media communication as a result. The fieldwork took place for the first 9 days of October, so this really is a hot off the press look at the key findings from the data. And as you can see from this first chart, the pandemic has been handled differently in each of these European markets, and so each is currently at a different stage of their recovery journey. At the moment, France has more workers in the office, and the UK has the largest contingent working from home, with Germany sitting somewhere in the middle. Among those who are currently working from home or on furlough, a large proportion still don't know when they are likely to return to the office. So the financial impact on consumers also varies by market. Whilst the largest proportion of people say they have seen no impact from the pandemic, if we look at the last bar, we can see the extremes are more distinct in the UK. Here, there's been a greater negative impact, with 2/5 saying that they have been negatively impacted. But on the other end of the scale, there's also been a greater positive impact for those in the UK, with 1 in 10 saying the pandemic has had a positive impact on their finances, and that's double that in France or Germany. So we asked people about the levels of trust they had in different media and institutions, bearing in mind the impact of coronavirus. The results show that in all 3 countries, governments are struggling to maintain trust at this challenging time. The German government appears to fare better, with less than 1/3 of respondents in that market saying they trust government less than pre-COVID, and over 10% saying it has increased. In France, this is the highest, so they're half saying that they trust the government less. Comparatively, fewer people say their trust in advertising has fallen when compared to trust in government, and this is true across all 3 markets. So building on the idea of public and private arenas, we asked people to imagine that they were having to promote a brand. In this scenario, we asked them which types of media they would use to ensure that their message was trusted. And here we can see that these results aligned with Justin's conclusion in the book. The European consumers view public media, so TV, out of home, cinema, press and radio, as more trustworthy than private media, so social, online and in-app. And trust in private is consistent across the markets, and trust in public is most pronounced in France. So it's encouraging to see that, broadly speaking, people still have a positive sentiment towards both public and private screen media. However, public media is generally more liked. Conversely, though, the public recognises the power of private screen media to deliver personalised messages, and this is marginally higher in the UK. So that was this top line finding. So to conclude this first wave of the mobility and sentiment tracker, we can see that the pandemic has been handled differently across the 3 European markets, and as a result of that, recovery is at different stages. The governments are struggling to maintain trust at this challenging time. Advertising is more trusted, and this is driven by trust in public media, especially TV and out of home. And the private media offers opportunities around personalisation, while public media are trusted and the public feel more positively towards them. But as always, a balance is key. So yeah, this is just the top line of our findings, and we'll be compiling and releasing a more in-depth report in the coming weeks. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Beth. That was really interesting, and we're very much looking forward to sharing more detail with the full results at another session dedicated to this study, specifically to Pulse 2020 in the coming weeks. I'll now hand you over to Isabelle Schlumberger, Executive Vice President of Sales, Marketing and Development for JCDecaux France, to wrap up the session. Isabelle.
Thank you, Tim. A very warm thank you to you all for this really insightful session. The new formula for media planning post-COVID is no longer intriguing. I have to say, a bit worried by the algebra side of it. Many thanks, Justin. The moment we're in is really going to be either a pause or a time we can all grasp change. Your book raises the question and provides strategic guidance on how brands can capitalize on the public media and OOH in particular. Today, we are really inviting you to a much more balanced marketing funnel. The top of the funnel makes the bottom of the funnel work harder, and the golden matrix we've learned is definitely consideration. A great question for brands is definitely, what is your measure of consideration? How will you measure it? There is a new need for test and learn, so brands can test this public and private combination you are proposing. Thank you also to Arnie to have shared with us his holistic plan, how great creative ideas can work for all the channels, whatever they are, public or private. Regarding the very first and interesting findings of our new sentiment tracker, we clearly see that our 3 countries have handled the pandemic very differently. And so we have different impact on consumers. However, they align on perceptions of media. Public media is seen trustworthy and really felt positively. Private media delivers personalization. The formula will be all the more reinforced by this. That's very good. Thanks really again to all our guests. A very special one for Justin. We can imagine the months of huge creativity. It was worth it regarding this reference book for many media planners, marketeers, and university lecturers in media. The book is now officially launched internationally. A proper hardback printed version is being distributed upon request through the JCDecaux marketing teams in your respective countries. Because you're online, the ebook is available to you now. And we have also an audiobook for the ones preferring earplugs. Thank you for listening. Very warm thank you to you all. And we look really forward for your reviews and feedback. Here is the future of media planning, the new difference.